Hello, Bloom with Deb friends. I'm so excited you're tuning in today. This has been a long and waiting interview I've been wanting to do with a dear friend. Her name is Colleen. I met her when she was a teenager. I was working at the Crisis Pregnancy Center and I worked with her mother, believe it or not, and I got to watch her grow up through her teenage years for 7 years. She came to my wedding 16 years ago with her family. And since then, we have gone in totally different directions. So I am inviting you to our conversation to learn about Colleen's life over these past 16, 17 years, because I know that her life will inspire you. She's the kind of godly girl that has always said yes to God. She's always been hungry for more. She never settled for less. And she walked by faith and accepted some amazing challenges. Now, as you know, my Bloom with Deb friends, Bloom stands for Biblically Living Out Our Mission. And I love interviewing women of all ages who are doing just that. And she is living on mission in Zimbabwe, currently in Canada, with her husband and baby. So we're going to hear about her faith journey as a single woman leading up to present and learn about her future plans. And she's going to give some great advice for you. And I just want you to stay tuned and be encouraged, because God has amazing, amazing adventures ahead for each one of us. And he's not done with us. So I just want to introduce you to Colleen and buckle up and enjoy the ride. Hello, Colleen. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Super. It's Labor Day. It's Monday, and we are ready to reconnect. It's been many years because you've been overseas, and I've been in Jacksonville, and now you're in Canada. So let's start from the beginning. When you were in high school, you were deciding about college plans and missions. You had done some mission work with your church, I believe.
Yep.
And I just want to hear from the beginning how God worked in your life to call you to Africa. When and how did God call you to Africa?
Yeah, it was a long sort of process with different layers to it. And so when I was 18 was the first time I went to a little country called Swaziland in the southern part of Africa. And I had no planning of it. This was not on my radar. I just went to church one Sunday morning, and the pastor of our congregation came up to me and said, "Hey, we're going to Swaziland this summer. Are you in?" And I had never done a missions trip, never really been anywhere outside of North America. And so I said, sure, why not? Which is 100% against my personality to just dive right into something without thinking. That is not what I do at all. So from the get-go, it was already a God moment that I even agreed to it. And then went to Swaziland and just fell in love with it. Fell in love with the people, fell in love with that specific country I loved. And so we went for 2 weeks, came back, and I decided that this is what I wanted to do. So I changed my major to international relations. I was going to University of Central Florida at the time, and then realized that that's kind of all about government, and that's not what I was interested in. So ended up finding a major called international development up here in Canada, where my family's from. So I moved up here and studied development, and I thought that was going to be my gateway into missions, was sort of the plan.
Sound went out for a second. So you studied international development. Great next step. That's really cool. Reminds me of my first mission trip to Romania. I did not know where Romania was on the map, but I said yes to when my college group was going, and looked it up later, and just God provided, and parents said yes, and I went. And I too, by the end of the 2 weeks, I'm like, okay, God, I'm willing to live here. If you want to call me here, I want to reach people, and I'll do it anywhere you want. And that was a life-changing moment, because that's when when we came back and had a prayer meeting, that's when I said yes to full-time ministry. I just
Mm.
wanted to tick Satan off. And that was my call to God to
One way to
serve.
do it.
Yeah, not some people do it to please God. I did it just
Yeah,
because I wanted to kick Satan in the teeth.
there you go.
So, yeah, we all have our own motivations,
Yeah,
but
at
that's
that, I wish at that point it was a biblical motivation for me, but it wasn't. It was a very selfish motivation. Um, I I genuinely loved helping people, and I loved how, I mean, it always feels good to help people. Um, and that's why even secular people enjoy helping others. You feel good about it. Um, so at that point, doing, studying development, wanting to go to Africa, it was about me. Even though I wanted to do it in a mission setting, I at that point I still didn't realize that it was about me, not about the Lord. And so that's why God pretty much refused to open that door full time for me for quite a few years. Mhm.
it's really revealing because it's true. He does have to strip us away of all of our pride and self in order to serve him
Mhm.
100% in the spirit with the right motives. That's really insightful looking back on your 20s.
Mm.
I too went through a season where it was like, I'm in the Word, I'm studying God's Word because I have a Bible study to teach. But
Mhm.
was it really because of my intimacy with the Lord
Yeah.
and an overflow, or was it because it was a job and it was something I
Mhm.
loved doing?
Mhm.
But how do you separate? Even when you go to Bible college, is it technical and academic, or is it intimacy? And
Yes.
how do you balance both? You
Mhm.
know? So, and that, what was that season like when the door wasn't opening and you had to stay in America and try other avenues?
Yeah, so I graduated with my bachelor's degree, went back to Florida where my parents live. And just with this mindset of, I want to get back to Africa. And so I got an internship at the church that I was a part of on their missions department. And so they let me go to, I think I went to 4 different countries that summer, um, just sort of doing overview stuff for them. And on the very first trip, I was supposed to go to Sri Lanka, which I was so excited about. But the date of the trip landed right on a wedding that I was supposed to be in. So the very last minute, they're like, well, we'll cancel you on that one. And there's a medical team that was going to Haiti. It was during the earthquake that had happened in 2010. They said, we're sending a medical relief team to Haiti. We're just going to, it's next week. We're going to put you on that team. I'm
Mm.
like, what am I going to, it was all doctors and nurses and me. Like this, I was 20 at the time and I knew nothing about disaster relief. So I went on this trip and there was 2 other ladies on the team that were not medical at all. And to this day, they're like, they don't even know how they ended up on this team. It was such a like, I'm just going. So one of them, they're both still lifelong friends. One of them ended up being my future boss who gave me a job when my internship was done. And the other one, just the most radical, charismatic, Jesus loving lady I've ever met in my life. And she's just that person that from the moment I met her, you just know she has something that I don't have and I want it. And so because it was Haiti and it was a disaster relief and the country was really not, it was pretty dangerous at the time, we had a buddy system on this trip. And so this lady was my buddy. So we never left each other's sight for 2 weeks. And the whole time she's talking about revelations from the Lord, dreams the Lord is giving her. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't understand. I didn't even have a realm in my brain of her relationship she had with the Lord. And so that's when I was just like, I'm really missing something here. Like, God is not just, I read verses, I memorize them, I have my little Bible study time, I go to church on Sunday. He's a relationship, like what you're talking about. I'm like, I didn't have that. And I didn't understand how you could have that with someone you can't see.
So when I came back, and the other lady on the trip gave me a job at her chocolate store, that she owned, and then this lady and I just started meeting with her a couple times a week. And it wasn't a like I wasn't telling her like, please disciple me, please tell me about the Lord. It was just a friendship. um but just her life and how she lived it was more than enough that it was discipleship for me. Like, we didn't have to sit down and go through a program. I just watched her live her life. And it just made me hungry. And so from that point, it was then that I that was part of the God killing my pride off moment, because I had a degree, I had a university degree, and I was expecting to go out and change the world, but the only job I could get was this job at a chocolate store where I mopped the floors. And I'm like, had a 4.0, I have this degree, and I am mopping floors at a chocolate store. Like, what the heck, God? But he made me just sit and stay and learn how to be in that relationship with him, which took a long time, and to just truly die to myself and accept whatever it is he said to do. Um, and so, yeah, that was quite a few years of learning that.
That is wonderful. And I think a lot of us can relate to wanting that older, wiser, godly woman in your life to mentor you, but in an organic way where it's not something you had to sign up for.
Yeah.
It's not something that you may have prayed for or asked, or maybe not. Maybe it just happened because God said, hey, this woman needs to be in your life for this season to help you grow to the next level. And I've seen that happen in many of my old students' lives, where I planted a seed at one stage of life, but then I got to watch them grow. And then we reconnected and we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this than we thought. Isn't this amazing? And so to be on that spiritual high and that level, it's not that we're different Christians. It's just that we've wanted more, and God blessed us with more faith, more understanding, more hunger. And I think it's all a gift from the Holy Spirit to have the hunger, to read the word, and to have the understanding as the Holy Spirit leads us. And again, through dreams and wonders and things that happen, it is a crazy adventure that only a few people really understand. But we've seen, I call it the remnant. There is a remnant that God's raising up of people that have been quietly growing in the Lord, and now he's going to expose them because they're humble. And it's not about names and titles and churches. It's individuals who are leading in a variety of different ways in their communities. And I just can't wait for God to reveal, to take the cover off and reveal his remnant, so that his glory can be shown and the awakening and the revival comes. And so that is awesome. I'm so glad this woman came into your life. And if you're looking for someone to be a mentor to you and come into your life, we want that for you too. And that's what Bloom with Deb is going to be doing come January 2022. It's more community groups in every city in America and worldwide. That is the goal. So let's continue your journey. I want to hear more now from the chocolate store to Africa. How did that door open finally, and what organization, or just what happened next?
So I was faithfully working away at the chocolate store, and I ended up getting a job at a local church. So I switched over to the local church, and the lady that I shared an office with was the director of the children's ministry program. And so I had told her and talked to her, like, my ultimate goal is to go overseas. At that point, I didn't, if it was Africa, Asia, I didn't care. I just wanted to be in a third world country. Again, still for my own selfish reasons, I hadn't quite figured it out just yet. And so so she was talking with one of her ladies, girls at the time, who helped run her children's ministry program. And she also was super interested in going overseas. And she was like, oh, you should go meet. I was new there. And she's like, you should go meet her. She wants to go overseas as well. So this lady came up to me. Her name's Devin. And she literally walked up to me in the foyer on a Sunday morning. And she was like, hi, I'm Devin. I hear you want to go overseas. I'm like, yeah. She's like, can I come with you? I don't have anything planned, but sure. So from there, that's literally how I met my now best friend, Devin. And that's who I do ministry with. And so we both were at a time. So we started becoming friends, and literally within a couple weeks of each other, broke off relationships that we were in. Both just coming to the realization at the same time that this isn't what God has for us, and there's more. And so it's just amazing how God works, because he both put it on our hearts at the exact same time of, okay, we had both seen and knew people that had so much more with the Lord and understood and knew him. And I had seen it, but I still didn't really have it yet. And so we both decided, let's do this together. So we committed once a week, we would get together and just pray. Not out loud. We literally just sat in the same room together in silence and just would sit there and just wait on God. Wow. And it was awesome, but also one of the most frustrating times ever, because my friend's super like just charismatic in her personality, let alone spiritually now. And so we would both be sitting there, and sometimes she'd show up in her pajamas with a blanket, and she'd fall asleep during this time that we're praying for like encounter with the Lord. And the Lord would encounter her when she'd be like passed out, like sleeping. She'd get these crazy visions and dreams. And I'd be there like, so like, no, I'm focused. I'm reading the scriptures. I'm doing A plus B. This should equal C, but I'm getting nothing over here. And so even in that, God was just still teaching me, like, let go of your agenda for goodness sakes. Like, let me be me, and you have to accept what I'm going to do, even if it's, something you desperately want is happening in someone else's life and you're not getting it. You still have to praise me anyways and still seek after me anyways. Like, quit it with your agenda already. And so she and I did this for, I want to say about a year and a half. And it just became like more and more. We got involved with a more charismatic church that just created even more of a hunger in us for, going after God with everything and not giving a rip what anyone thought. So we would do these all-night prayers all the time and fast all the time. And I remember because we both lived at home with our parents. So it was hard to do all night prayers in our own houses because we didn't want to disrupt our parents trying to sleep. And so we would get gigs doing pet sitting and house sitting for people. So we would have these all night prayers at other people's houses and invite people to be like, you don't have to come all night, like just whenever you're free, stop by, which we were just out of college. So we knew a lot of people who were up at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, and would just come by for an hour or two, and we'd pray with them, and God would just do awesome things. I remember this one time we were house sitting, and this couple, they knew us and they knew what we were doing and they loved it, but their neighbors thought we were running some sort of drug program out of their house.
Yeah. People coming and going all hours of the night.
All hours of the night. So when they came back home, all their neighbors were coming up to them being like, those girls were dealing drugs out of your house. And so they were laughing, trying to tell them, no, they were having prayer. No one believed them.
The drug of Jesus. Yeah. That is fantastic. What year is this?
That must have been around 2011, 2012.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think?
Yeah. And so then so we were doing that, and that's, that was just growing our faith exponentially, just by we were truly understanding who, what it is to be in a relationship with God and what it is to hear from God and wait upon hearing his voice. We just became so convinced that we will not move from this place until we hear him say what to do next. And so it was in those times of just learning to hear his voice and then stepping out in faith, thinking, okay, I think this is God, what I'm hearing. So let's take this step out and see what happens. And it was little things that he just taught us how to hear him in. One night we were watching a sermon about evangelism, and afterwards we both just looked at each other and we're like, we need to go tell people about Jesus. And it was 11 o'clock at night. And we're like, we were already in our pajamas.
Perfect time.
Yeah. So we change, we drive out, and we're like, where do we go tell people about Jesus? We're like, Walmart's open. So drove into Walmart, and we're just wandering the aisles, and we're like, okay, God, we want to do everything step by step, not ever take this plan into our own hands. And so we wandered the aisles. Neither one of us felt like we had to tell, any specific person. And then we go to the checkout lane, and we both were like, let's just pay for the groceries for this lady in front of us. So we walk up to her, like, can we pay for your groceries? She looks at us like we're crazy people. And I'm like, there's no agenda, just want to bless you. And she was like, okay. To pay for her groceries, we're like, can we help you carry them to your car? She's like, okay. So we helped carry them to her car, and then we asked if there was anything we could pray for her. So she filled us in on some stuff, and we prayed for her in the parking lot of Walmart at now midnight. Then someone else saw us doing this, came over to us, and was saying how he's been depressed for months, unsure of his faith. And then he saw that, and he's like, I am so excited for the Lord. And we're like, awesome. So we pray for him. Then both of us felt like the night's still not over. Like, God's still doing something. There's more. So we walked across the street to the university campus. We're wandering around, and we're like, I don't know. There's still a lot of people out. We're like, I don't know who we should talk to. And Devin felt there was a girl laying by the fountain. And she was like, she said, if that girl sits up in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to tell her about Jesus. And the girl sat up. She's like, okay. So we go over and walk up to her, and Devin just looks at her and says, God just wants you to know how much he loves you. And she just stares and starts crying. Devin's like, what did I do? I broke her.
I broke her.
And this girl proceeds to tell us, she was like, I was laying here praying, wondering, does God even see me? And does he even know what I'm going through? And then you walk up and you say that. And so anyways, it was crazy. We're still friends with her. We know her to this day. But just, seeing God in such small ways. We started working with homeless ministry, and just, again, you sense him saying something or doing something, and it's just a little small step of faith to say something to someone or to talk to someone. And we would just see these crazy things happen. And so it just builds up your faith more and more, so that when he says, okay, now I need you to do this big of something. And then you're like, okay, I've seen that you're faithful. Like, you're going to work this out. So why not?
Oh my God, that encourages me. I've had tears as you're sharing. Oh my God, I love those God stories. They're such a divine appointments. And just you and Devin's obedience to say yes that night, and to go out by faith and not give up, and to persevere and just be a blessing. No agenda. It's not a switch and bait, like, hey, we're gonna do something nice for you, so we'll feel good. And it was all because that man who was depressed needed to see it, and which of course pumps you up to want to do more. And I could just picture you, because I went to UCF, and I know where the fountain is, and I know people walk around at midnight, and you never know who you're going to meet. And I just love those God moments when people really do ask. Even when we did beach evangelism, door-to-door evangelism, I have story upon story in my 50 journals behind me of those appointments where God would lead us to people who were asking those questions. Even spring breakers, this one girl's like, I was asking, there's got to be more to life than this. And is there really a God? And I'm bored drinking. I'm tired of this. And we're like, well, we're here to tell you there is more to life. And that's exactly the wall we hit at 22. And so God continually leads us. That's so neat. I love your stories. Okay, so now you've grown leaps and bounds. You're walking with the Lord. You're hearing from him. Your faith is strong. Now, how did Africa come into the play?
Yeah, so 2013, my friend Devin, I was a bit older than her, so she was just finishing university. And she was looking for an internship. And like all of third world missions was to me, she held on to Egypt. Egypt was her thing. That was where she wanted to go. And at the time, the revolution was happening in Egypt. And so most mission organizations were pulling out of Egypt, not going in. So I knew of one organization that was still in Egypt. So I told her, I was like, well, check out this group called MCC. So she looked them up and they had an Egypt thing. She applied and she got it. And then as she's on the phone with the people telling her she's been approved, they're excited to offer her the Egypt position, the Lord tells her no. And so she didn't tell them no right away because she was like, I can't be hearing this right. So she just said, can I take the week to think about it? And the guy's like, of course, let us just get back to us. And all that week, God showed up in a mazillion ways to tell her no, literally through a homeless guy at the homeless ministry. We're pretty sure was probably an angel, walked up to her and beelined and just said, what is God telling you to do? And she's like, well, I'm going to be a missionary in Egypt. And he said, no, you're not. That's not what he's saying. And she's like, who are you? Anyways, this guy kept going on. And then when we turned around to look at each other, like, what is happening here? And he was gone. So it was whatever. But anyways, through all these things this week just kept confirming, like, absolutely not. You are not supposed to go to Egypt. So she finally accepted and called the people back and said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I'm not supposed to do it. And so the organization said, okay, just take a look at some of the other open positions we have and get back to us. So she did, and she prayed through all of them. And the very last position, it was alphabetical by country. So the very last one was a social worker in Zimbabwe.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. And so she, like you in Romania, she had no idea where Zimbabwe was, knew nothing about it. Meanwhile, I had studied African politics and development and knew everything about it. And so that she just felt a peace that was it. So she called them back and she accepted that. And then she instantly called me and said, where's Zimbabwe? I'm like, oh goodness. So at that time, so it was a year-long internship, and just the leading up to it and her going was like the final nail in the coffin for me with God of like, let it go. Because now my best friend gets to go to Africa.
Yeah.
I wasn't. And I ended up leaving the job at the church, and I had to go back to the chocolate store. So I'm mopping floors again. And my best friend is getting my dream. It was ugly. It was not good. So ugly crying on floors quite often. And so even in that, and the Lord's just kind, because even in that, I'm trying to work out my own plan of like, I gotta get there. Like, this cannot be it. And so I tried to make my own plan with, I connected with a church in Uganda through my church. And they said they would love to have me come out and live and work with them. So I made plans. Devin had been in Zimbabwe about 4 months, and I decided I'm going to go to Uganda for a week, check this place out. I'm on the same continent, so I'll visit Devin on my way back to the States. So
are you saying Uganda or Ghana?
Uganda.
Uganda. Okay, got it. Okay.
So I went to Uganda and spent a week there, and I was like, I don't see why I would say no. Like, it was great. I really liked the pastors there. So I had it in my head at the end of that week in Uganda that I'll come back here and this is what I'll do. even though the Lord hadn't told me to do any of that. And so then on my flight, I stopped in Zimbabwe for a week with Devin. And our whole goal in this week, because I already had made up my mind, so our whole goal wasn't to like, be holy and spend all this time with the Lord. Our goal was to just be best friends and chat for a week and catch up. And so in that time, we were just trying to get alone, because she lived in a very small house with a pastor's family in a very poor area of town. And so there were always people there. And so we were just trying to find some place where we could just be by ourselves and talk. But literally the entire week long, people would walk up to us and just say, tell me about this Jesus. Like, pray for me. This is what's going on. And it was just bizarre. And by like the third day, I'm looking at her and I'm like, this is the easiest mission field in the world. This is ridiculous. And she's like, this has never, ever happened before. So clearly there's probably something happening here that the Lord's saying with the two of us being together in this place. So I went back to the States for a month, packed up my things and moved into this same tiny house with this pastor's family with her, which was against her like internship rules, but we didn't want to do anything wrong. So she was like, can my friend come live here with me while I'm doing this? And lucky, God again, her boss was just like, okay, that's fine. So moved in and had no idea why I was there. Like, we knew God was doing something, but I didn't have anything to actually do. Like, she had her internship that she did every day out of this church, but I couldn't go do that. And so I just felt like, well, we're here for a reason. We don't know what. So go back to the beginning of don't move until you hear God say. So I spent most of my days sitting in the church foyer praying, which was the hardest thing ever to do. It was a tiny room of about 15 feet by 6 feet and just pacing back and forth all day long. Often repeating the same thing over and over, not doing anything but just laying there waiting for something. And in that time, we decided to do a 40-day fast, which do not ever do unless the Lord has told you to, because we didn't do it completely. We did we only ate one meal in the middle of the night. So we're hungry and sleep deprived. Bad, horrid combination. It was wild. Never done it again. But in that time is when the Lord started to show us why we were there, what this was all for. And yeah, it was amazing.
Now, when you went to Africa, did you have a return ticket, or wait, how long did you plan on staying?
Yeah, I only planned on staying through Devin's internship. So we both had return tickets I was there for a total of 6 months.
Okay. Now, real quick, any challenges in this plan? Because you've got parents who might be worried about you going to Africa. You have financial obligations. Like, how did God work through all of this in letting your parents be okay with it and providing financially?
Yeah, I think I probably have the reverse story of many people, in that my parents had seen the passion that I had for third world stuff since I was 18. And at this point I was 24. And they had been saying for years, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you working at a chocolate store? Like, what a waste. They paid for my education and I'm at a chocolate store. So our arguments and disagreements were about me staying there and them feeling like I was wasting my life. And that was where the tension was coming from, and me trying to explain in not the wisest, most mature of ways, but me trying to explain to them, I'm not doing anything until I hear from God. I'm not like, I will waste my life at this chocolate store. If that's what he tells me to do, I will do it. The chocolate store was a mission field, so I didn't even see it as a waste. But for parents who, at that point, I even got a master's degree, and they're like, what are you doing? You have a master's degree. You're working at a chocolate store.
I could hear them saying that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so by the time this all was happening, in a 3-year span, they were finally like, thank goodness you found, God is finally saying go. So they were happy about it. It's hard to let me go, but they knew that it was of the Lord. And so, yeah, they could accept
24 is still pretty young to go on this adventure. How was, you've had some relationships in your life. So how was your heart? Like, did you have a desire to be married one day, or was just serving God your only goal?
Yeah, when we first went, it was because it was such a short-term thing. It wasn't really on my radar at that point. It was still just an adventure. When we came back after that time, we were in the States again for another year before we went back to Zimbabwe permanently. And so in that year is when we met with a lot of people who, were throwing out wisdom, but not necessarily wisdom we needed to hear in a strange way. And that's something I just, I hope that I can be for the next generation coming of, I wish our elders would encourage people to be crazy for Jesus and to do crazy things for Jesus. Because we got a lot of pushback that we were young. I was 24, she was 22. And one of the things it was wise, and I do appreciate what this person said. They were saying, if you do this, like, are you prepared to kiss goodbye, marriage, family? Because what are the odds that if you move to a third world country, what are the odds of you finding someone there to spend the rest of your life with, to start a family? Are you able to accept that? And so that was a decision Deb and I both we made. We're like, yeah, if that's what the Lord is saying, we'll say goodbye to it. We'll say singleness is for us, if that's what God has. And if that is what he has, then he'll give us the grace to do it. Didn't make it easy, and it didn't make it pleasant. It didn't mean there weren't tears when you see everyone else on Facebook getting married and you're sitting in a burning hot teeny tiny room in Africa. But we had said that if we do this, it's forever. It's not saying that the Lord would make us stay forever or would say, no, you're going to be single forever, but we had to get it in our minds that we can't sit around with expectations that something else is going to happen only to become bitter and angry at God because it didn't work out that way. So we both went into it with eyes open of, yeah, we're probably making a choice of saying no to those things because this is what we truly believe God's saying. And that's way worth it. So that was our mental, state going into it.
It's interesting. A lot of people, when I was single for 34 years, one of the verses I clung to was that he will give us, if we are devoted to him, he will give us the desires of our heart. And so it could always be a desire in the background, but we can still serve God with contentment, knowing that this desire too is just as important.
Yeah.
And, if God can bring Steve to me at the Crisis Pregnancy Center, my thought is, oh my gosh, of course he can bring a guy to you in Africa or Zimbabwe or, you know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't sound impossible to me. My friend started an orphanage in Haiti and was single for probably 40, almost maybe 50 years. And he did bring a godly man into her life, and she's been married for 4 or 5 years now.
Wow.
So it's like nothing's impossible.
No,
it's just the timing and of it all. And it's learning to be content in the waiting and serving him during the waiting. It's we don't have to sit. Good. So now let's fast forward to after the year, you went back to the same place, Zimbabwe?
Yep.
With Devin or not?
Yep. With Devin.
Devin.
So
Okay, good.
we
Did you have to raise money?
So in that time of being in the States back for a year, we knew God was saying, like, he was opening the door that there was something to be done in Zimbabwe, specifically working with, we work with homeless boys in the streets of Zimbabwe. And that, I mean, we were very young. And so to just see that need, to see that calling, but we didn't know what to do with it. It's a huge thing. And what, like, how do you even start? What do you do with that? And so we went back to the States for a year. And again, I went back to the chocolate store. Devin found a job. And we just sat and prayed and just continued to do ministry in the States. And just waiting for God to open that door again. Because it was, yeah, we could push something of our own strength, but what a waste of time. So we just wanted to wait on him. And in that time, we got connected to a new church in another crazy God way, that just wanted to get behind our zero planning program. Like, what church is excited about two 20-somethings who have no clue what they're doing, don't have a plan, and just are like, we're just going to do what God tells us to do. Like, no church does that, but this one did. And so we started connecting with them, and through different prophetic things that were said and things that happened, the pastor in Zimbabwe that we were working with out of the church called us one day and just said, I think it's time you come back. We're like, okay. And so we had felt, as we were praying about it, that God was telling us there's nothing wrong with fundraising at all, but you're not going to do it. We're like, okay. So we had the two of us. And at that point, we were paying for 3 boys to be housed with a foster parent in Zimbabwe. So we were paying for their schooling, their housing, their food, and this Zimbabwean guy to help cover his costs to do this. And we were able to do that out of our own pocket because we were both working. So that's how we were doing it up until that point. And then when God said, you're not going to fundraise and you're going to be over there, we're like, okay. So we just prayed. And there was always money. There's never not been money. It's insane. I mean, we've literally, from people we don't know sending us checks to, I'm like the finance person, the more detail oriented. So we would have to keep, at times we had to keep our money just in an envelope. I knew exactly what was in that envelope, and I've seen it multiply. Like, I will count it one day and I'll count it the next day, and it is 2 different numbers. It's just like, okay. So to us, it's always been, we've never asked for a penny. I tried to once. So when I worked at the chocolate store, my boss is a believer, and she's just an amazing, godly woman. I love her. And she said, well, we could do like a roundup of the change thing at the store. Just ask people they want to round up the change. And I was like, that'd be cool. And so the day that we were going to do this, we did it with like a couple customers, and this guy walks in and he looks at me and he was like, God sent me here to tell you something. And I'm like, uh-huh. And he was like, God doesn't need your change. And he walked out of the store.
Way. No way. That's crazy.
So I told all the kids, I was like, we're not doing this anymore. Stop it. We're not asking for anything. And they're like, but it's working. People. And I was like, no, we're not doing this. And so they're like, okay. So we stopped doing it. And then the very next day, my boss was gone on vacation. So I was running the store while they were away. And we were out of all the random things in the world, we were out of these little gelato spoons, like these tiny little gelato.
I know those. Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
So we had,
so we had that at the store, and we ran out, and boss is away on vacation. I don't know where you buy gelato spoons. And she was in a third world country, so I couldn't get a hold of her. And so I'm just like, Lord, this isn't really a big deal, but I guess I'll go buy like regular size spoons. It's not as fun, but I guess that's what I'll go do. But I also didn't have time to go do it because I was the only one there at that point. A couple minutes later, a guy walks in. He's holding these two big boxes. And he was like, hey, I used to own this ice cream store a few miles down the road. It's closing. And I had these two boxes of gelato spoons. I'm wondering if you could use them.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, of course.
What the heck?
That is fantastic.
Oh yeah. So to this day, I have one of those gelato spoons to remind me, if God can provide me with gelato spoons for a bunch of wealthy people to have gelato, like, of course he can provide me with whatever fun I need to do whatever he's saying to do, no problem. And so this has, like, again, we only do this because the Lord has said to do this. I have nothing against people fundraising and all, like, nothing against it at all. But it's only because this is what God's told us to do. And we infuriate so many people because of it. It's kind of funny sometimes. I've had elders come up to me and be like, so what do you need? Because that's a huge thing and churches do want to know. It's helpful for them. Like, what do you need? How can we specifically help you? And I'm like, I don't know. And he was like, well, what do you have in your bank account right now? And I don't know. And he's like, what do you mean you don't know? I'm like, I don't know. I don't look at it. Like, we just keep sort of taking the money as we need it, and it's always there. So I don't really worry about it. And it drove him nuts.
It's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, when people ask, how can we specifically help? I'm like, you need to ask the Lord that, because I genuinely don't know. Not from a disrespectful point of view, but from I don't know what's coming. So how can I know what we need? Only God does. And so I trust that he will tell somebody what we need, because that's what he's done so far. And we've sort of used it as a joke in the ministry, because I mean, it's hard and it's exhausting work, what we do. And there's been so many times where we wanted to quit and we wanted this to be over with because it's tough. And our thing has always been, when the money dries up, then we can quit. Because if the Lord's not going to provide for it anymore, it's over. No problem. We get to go home. And so there's been times where I have known, like, I see the money in the envelope and there's no more. We're getting down to the bottom of the envelope.
Magic envelope.
There's not much more money. And so literally Deb and I have been like, yay, it's over. We get to go home. And then we'll get a giant something from somebody. And we're like, okay, we still have to keep going. So we've taken sort of the opposite spin of, we're like, half the time we're like, oh man, more money has come in. That must mean that God's got even more planned for us. So, but yeah, we literally have never, ever had to worry about money, because that's just what he's told us to do. And that's how we get to operate. It's pretty fun.
It is fun. I remember living by faith and not, knowing what I was going to have for the next month. And I needed to hear this story, and I hope many of our listeners do too, because it is so true that we can live by faith even if we're in the world and not doing full-time ministry. We do live by faith, and there are ways that God can provide that are supernatural, that don't make sense. Our checking account doesn't make sense. And so I love, whether you use an envelope or a bank or a piggy bank or whatever you have. I mean, really, God's math is ridiculous and it doesn't make sense. And so I just applaud you for living by faith and being a living, it reminds me of those little books I used to read from past missionaries. And I can't even think of his name right now, but yeah, Wilberforce, and I don't know, all those funny guys in the 40s, 50s, I don't know, but they lived by faith and didn't worry about money. So that is super cool. All right, so as we sum up, we have to close soon, but I do want to know how you met Brad, your husband. How did he come into the picture?
Yeah, so he is Zimbabwean. His family has lived there for 2 generations now. And back about 5 years ago, so it was not too long after Devin and I went back to Zimbabwe permanently, we had a crazy cold winter that winter. And so we had spoken to the church about allowing us to house some of the boys from the streets overnight in the church so that they could, I mean, it was below freezing some nights. And so we just felt awful about them being out there in such cold conditions. So the church agreed to give us space in the church overnight. And we just we had a couple of the youth group leader at the church, a couple other guys of the church would help us out. Because for the two of us to wrangle 30 boys overnight, way too big of an ask for just us. So God always provided other young men to come help us do this. And so one night, a guy had called Devin, she had met him originally when she was doing the internship, and then he moved to South Africa. And he was in town visiting his parents, and he just said, "Hey, are you free tonight? Would love to catch up." So she told him, "I'm sorry, my friend and I are having to be at the church all night long this is what we do." He was like, "Oh, can I come and can I bring a friend?" If you want to. We tend to just watch Disney movies and play cards and hang out until everyone falls asleep. And so he came and he brought his friend, and his friend was my now husband, Brad. So he laughs because his friend had the intention of, we're going to meet girls, because there aren't many young women in Zimbabwe. A lot of the young educated population leaves. That's just what you do. And so he had it in his head, we're going to go meet these young educated 20-somethings who love the Lord. And Brad walks into the building, sees the boys, and he just says his life was changed. Like, he had lived there his whole life, but he had never really noticed them, even though they're all over the place. And the Lord just hit him really hard with, how have you never seen them? And so he spent the whole night playing cards and watching movies with the boys and didn't speak to us at all. And then he ended up getting involved in the ministry and leading a Bible study with the boys. And just through those years of just sort of watching him interact with the boys got my attention, but he was still so focused on just the ministry. I'm like, hello. Yeah, and he wasn't paying any attention. But until literally one day I had had enough. And I went over to his house and said, listen, I really like you. Do you like me? Good. And he didn't respond to that moment. He said, I don't know. And about 3 months later, he asked me out. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a long 3 months. That's so funny. Oh, that's hard. You're a little hard. Well, how precious.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously God gave you the unction and the guts to go and do that. That's really scary to take that step and put yourself out there. Good job.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but unless I'm like, I kind of know, and if it's not him, then I give up. But
that's a lot of prayer. Yeah, that's a lot of prayer for him to come around. We kind of had the opposite, whereas like Steve pursued me and wanted more, and I was scared, and I gave him, it was 3 months before we went out on our first date, and then it was 3 months before the first kiss and the I love you. And I mean, I was so slow in catching up to him, but he pursued with reckless abandon because he just knew this is who I want. And sometimes the guys know. So once he did start dating you, you mentioned something about, now your parents got to meet him and see him before you were dating and friends. And then once he wanted to pursue you, did you mention he asked your parents permission to date you or to marry you? How did that happen? Oh, and he was ready.
Yeah, so we had gone out for about 6 months, but because we had known each other for years, and a lot of the weight that Brad sort of knew about choosing to get in a relationship with me is that this whole ministry and my whole life came with it. It's not just, someone who loves Jesus and I can do whatever I want. I mean, we really barely even got to date. Like, I can think of maybe 3 actual dates because I have boys with me all the time. Because we've helped boys get off the streets. And so they come in and out of our lives depending on where they are. And so there was not a freedom to date in a traditional sense. And my life just it doesn't have a lot of freedom because it is God's work. And so he really kind of knew that if this happens, that he's taking that on, and it has to be a calling from the Lord for his life, because you can't separate the two. There was no way I was going to have this ministry and him do his side thing. He knew that this had to be a calling from the Lord, that this would be his ministry as well. And in the midst of all of that, I know that's not exactly your question, but in the midst of all of that, just for another God moment, from the moment we started the ministry, Devin knew that if either one of us got married and the other one didn't, it would be devastating and really kind of mess our friendship up. Which if our friendship gets messed up, the ministry gets messed up, and it would just be a domino effect. So from the beginning of the ministry, she had been praying, God, if we are to get married, it needs to be the exact same time, like the exact same time. And so in the middle of Brad and I dating, which we never really did, but it was just like seeing each other with intentionality different from just ministry. A friend of someone that came to Zimbabwe had a dream about Devin and this guy that they knew back in Tennessee. And she was like, I had never dreamed before. So I think there's something to this. Can I introduce you over Facebook? And so they did that. So Devin started seeing her now husband. And we got married within 2 days of each other.
Wow.
How God works. Which is why you should always ask big, because you never know what he's going to do.
So did this Tennessee guy come out and meet her and see the ministry and feel called to do this?
So in about, so this was all like Brad and I started dating in December. And in June of the next year, he had never left Zimbabwe really. And he knew he wanted to ask my parents' permission to marry me before doing that. And so we decided he would come to Florida for my, I usually take a month off in the summertime. So he came, and Devin was coming as well. And she was flying back to Florida to meet this guy who was driving down from Tennessee. It was like the most bizarre 2 days ever. So we're literally in a car, and Brad's terrified because he's about to, go to my parents' house and ask my dad, who he's met once before. And then there's this guy that none of us have met in the backseat of the car. And he's just like, I don't even know who you people are, but I'm just here because I want to meet this girl. And it was a wild couple weeks. But then so my dad said yes. We got engaged a couple days later. And then Jacob, the guy that was pursuing my friend Devin, we all went back to Zimbabwe. He was praying about it and felt same thing as Brad. Like, if I pursue this girl, I have to know, like, this is the calling for my life. And so he came out and lived with Brad in September of that year and got to know the ministry, fell in love with the boys, asked Devin to marry him a couple months later, and we all got married within 2 days of each other at the end of December.
Wow. Where did y'all get married?
We got married in my parents' backyard, which they literally had always thought I was joking about, because they'd be like, where would you want to get married? And I'm just like, if I get married, we can do it in the backyard with a bucket of chicken, no problem. And then when it was actually, real, and they were like, where do you want to get married? And I was like, what I always said, in the backyard. And instead of a bucket of chicken, I guess we can have Chick-fil-A. So we had Chick-fil-A in the backyard.
Now, was Devin at your wedding and you went to hers? I mean, your best friend's here. She's got to be the maid of honor.
Yeah, so she got married on the 22nd of December, and I was, I think her sister was the official maid of honor, and I was the bridesmaid. And then Brad and I got married just after Christmas, and they stopped their honeymoon, came back, so they could both be in the wedding. And yeah. And then we all flew back to Zim together.
Back to Zim. Wow. So do you each have your own houses now? Or, I mean, how does the ministry operate?
So God's just been so great. He brought us, because I mean, we know that as long as the ministry just relies on us, it can't be that big, and it can't grow very much if it's just the four of us. And so the Lord very early on brought us a pastor there, and how he got connected to us was another ridiculous God story, and him just being faithful when it didn't make sense at all. And so he started working with us, and he's just amazing, and we just rely on him so much. And so he really has we would leave for bits and pieces, and he never really liked it when we had to leave and go back to the States for a time, because he loves evangelism and preaching, but he hates details. So the details and organizing of the whole thing, he hated. But in this past year, I got pregnant and wanted to come back to the States to be with my mom during this time. And then Devin got pregnant, because we have to do everything at the same time. It's just
good. I'm so happy for Devin too. Yeah. That's wonderful.
So
did she have a boy or girl?
Girl. We both have girls, because that's what yeah, we take life together to a whole nother
level. They get to grow up together.
Yeah. So she's in the States now as well with her mom. And so Beggy's been having, that's the name of the pastor, he's been having to run things on his own for about 6 months now, and he's rocking it out. And so it's been really cool for us to see that he can do this, and he now knows he can do this. And so we just know God's going to keep opening the door in ways for us to expand the ministry. But right now we both have, we've been sort of living in the same place, but at different times. It's very confusing, our lives. My husband and I had a house, and then we gave it to Beggy, the pastor. And then we live in his Brad's brother's has like a granny flat. And so we live there, then Devin and Jacob live there, and it's complicated. We're not sure where we're moving back to. We don't really have a home at the moment, but we know God will provide. It's his problem.
When do you plan on going back? What does the future hold? 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, on a
baby.
On a plane for 19 hours with a 3-month-old, heading into who knows what, I don't know. We'll find out.
And Devin too, is she heading back at the same time?
No, she's due the beginning of December. So
she's not had the baby yet.
Mm-hmm. So we sort of reversed roles, she said, because she got to go to Africa 6 months sooner than I did, which was my dream. And her dream was to always be a mom. And I got to be pregnant 6 months sooner. So she had to have her own Jesus time of letting that go. Because she wasn't supposed to be able to have kids. The doctors had told her it's not going to happen. And she had to give all that up, let it go. And when she literally went for an appointment with a surgeon to try to make a plan on how could she have kids, the surgeon said, well, we can't do the surgery because you're pregnant. So that's
praise God. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we'll definitely be praying for her delivery and everything to go smoothly in December. So as we finish up, this has been an incredible story time. I just love hearing and catching up with everything you've been through. 2 questions I have for you. What advice would you give your past self if you could talk to that 18-year-old Colleen who feels called but not knowing that she's going to have to wait and prepare? What advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, it would probably, I think the hardest thing about what all God has taken me through was really not feeling like I had the support of the church, because it was a crazy, and it still is a crazy thing that we do. And I think there's so many people that want to squash squash things and say it's too big. And God, you're only 20. You don't know exactly what you're doing. You're not mature enough. And there were things that we messed up in because we weren't that mature, but because God told us to go do it, there's so much grace that he'll put over your mistakes. And so I would just, I wish I didn't have so much fear of making those mistakes, and beating myself up for those mistakes and thinking all those people were right. We are too young to be doing this. What the heck are we doing? This was a huge mistake, because we don't have all the answers. But that's part of life. We're never going to have all the answers. You just have to trust and have faith that God does, and he knows what he asked you to do. And so there's going to be grace for the fact that you're not going to do it perfectly. He's not looking at the outcome. He's looking at your heart, and he's looking at your willingness to do it. And so, yeah, I wish I had understood sooner that it is not about the tangible. It wasn't about the tangible ministry. It's always been about God, working through this process within me. And that whatever the ministry is, it's not on me. That's his concern. And I don't need to wear that weight and that burden. Because if you start to really think and process, whatever it is God's asking you to do or what you feel he's telling you to do, if you start looking at the actual thing, it's huge and it can feel crushing, and really scary. And so I wish I had learned a lot sooner to stop looking at the physical things of this world, and just solely focus on him and just sort of keep gliding through life and not rush ahead to the next day. Because as soon as you're in the next day, you're like, that's a long list of things to do. I'm so far off my goal. How am I ever going to accomplish this? Instead of truly living at what it is to be in sync with the Lord and just relishing in who he is and letting him handle it. Because it's so not our problem. Like he's shown time and time again, it's his problem and he's more than capable. Like it was never, he didn't design us to take on that weight and that burden. And that's why it is crushing, because he wants us to look to him. But he'll let it crush you if that's what you choose to do. And so it's a heck of a lot easier to just let it go from the start than to think you're responsible for everything.
That's awesome. I know your mom is very amazed by your faith, and it is incredible to, grow up around Andrea Kreiseiss and all these women who have started these ministries and, these role models that we've had in our lives. It's got to be humbling to see, for your mom and dad to see what you're doing by faith and to see their prayers being answered and seeing God's provision for you. And it impacts your family. It impacts everybody who knows you to see this living testimony of someone who walks by faith, someone who's blooming. And these are the stories and these are the people that I want to give a platform for, to share your story, to share your faith, to inspire others to do radical things for Jesus. That's what it's all about. And I wonder, with this generation coming up behind us, what advice do you have for them? What would you like to say to our Bloom with Deb listeners today?
I truly think the best thing I've ever done was I intentionally stopped the normal life course plan thing. After I graduated university, it was I think everyone sort of goes through that of like, my life's been planned out until this point. And now what? And instead of just diving into the usual, well, now I need to find a job that has to do with my degree or whatever comes along, I'll just take it. I intentionally made a choice to just stop. And I remember the first time I decided that what I need to pursue is how to hear God's voice. Because what else, none of that other stuff matters. If I can't hear his voice, I'm wasting my time. And I had heard people talk about it a lot, but I didn't know what that meant. like really tangibly, what does that mean? And I just remember going into my parents' backyard and sitting on a hammock we have in our backyard. And I just put on worship music in my, iPod back in the day. And I would just sit there for an hour every single day and just sit and wait. And I would just say, Lord, I'm not moving. I'm not guessing at what life is about. I just want to know who you are. And I need to hear your voice, because what is this all for if it's not about you and me? And I hear people talking about being in a relationship, but what is that? And it was hardly an instant thing. Like, it was months, I think, of sitting in that hammock, just waiting, just listening to worship music until you can start sensing something. It's like, I think that could be something. And then just taking those little steps. So it is, I would just, I wish everyone would prioritize that your goal is to hear his voice, not to, busy ourselves with the American dream or anything else.
Good. Excellent. I think that is so true. That is the beginning of wisdom, is to hear his voice and to weigh it against God's word, to know that it's his voice that you're listening to, not your flesh, not the enemy. There's a lot of people that offer godly wisdom, but they may not be on the same spiritual journey that you're on. And so it's very important to have discernment, to know who to listen to, and to take those steps of faith, even when it's opposite of what elders or church people say to do, because your calling and your purpose may be different than their calling and purpose, and they don't understand it, and it may make them uncomfortable. The fact that you're not under a covering, you're not under an organized organization or a church or a parachurch organization, you're doing this all on your own by faith, and not a lot of people do that kind of stuff, and it's just wonderful. I would love to talk more next time if we can do this. I don't know if we can do this from Zimbabwe or not, but I want to hear about the work.
We can always try.
Okay. I know you're probably busy the next 2 weeks, but if we do have time to have a continuation, I'd love to hear the stories about the boys. I want to hear more about what the day-to-day life looks like, how you make decisions for your ministry, how you and Devin get along in making those decisions together as a partner. And now with the husbands involved, what that dynamics is going to look like. And there's still so much more we can talk about. I only scheduled an hour and a half. I didn't know it would go this long, but this has been fascinating for me personally. I hope my audience it's enjoying it as much as I am. But let me just close in prayer and encourage you to continue the path you're on. You're doing an amazing job, and we also need to continue talking about motherhood and how that fits into the picture. You're going to have a lot of precious boys that want to be babysitters, and they're going to love your daughter and Devin's daughter. And I hope I get to come out and visit you someday. I really want to see all this in person.
Be awesome.
Yay. Okay, Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the work you're doing in Colleen's life and Devin's life and Brad and Jacob. God, we just pray a blessing over their ministry. We praise you for your provision. We praise you for your protection. We praise you for multiplying their fruitfulness, that you have blessed them and you've added to their numbers daily, that you have added these husbands, you've added these babies, and you've added the pastor. God, we do not take this lightly, but we know that you cause all things to work for your good. And that we thank you for raising up these young couples to go and do the work in Zimbabwe. We thank you for the young boys that they get to interact with and pour into. We praise you and thank you for just allowing them to be your hands and feet in that community. We praise you and thank you for your guidance and direction, wisdom and discernment. We thank you for the right partnerships with the right volunteers and the and everybody that's involved in this ministry. We just pray a covering of protection and peace as they travel 19 hours with the baby. We pray for the baby to do well, for little Zaylee. God, we just thank you for this precious life and for her future. And we thank you, God, for allowing us to hear just a glimpse of your work in Colleen's life and Brad's too. And just thank you for hearing our prayers and for preparing the way for us to see your goodness and kindness in our lives. Thank you for feeding that hunger that we have to know you more. Thank you for allowing us to hear your voice. Thank you for just being so real, even though you're invisible. Thank you. We love you so much. And we just can't wait to be reunited in heaven together to celebrate all the fruitfulness and blessings you've allowed us to have on this earth, but also for the world to come. God, I can't wait to see what our assignments are in heaven and the damage we're going to do together. So Lord, we thank you. We can't wait to see you. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Love you, Colleen. So glad our paths have crossed over the years and will continue to cross. Know that you're going to be in my prayers.
Thank you.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You. Thank you. It was awesome. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
No worries. Anytime.
We'll keep in touch. I'll see you soon. I promise.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye, sweetie.